My daughter hadn't come to visit for a whole month. I decided to check on her myself, taking the spare key I kept. But when I walked in, I heard a quiet scratching coming from the attic. When the rescue team pried the door open, we saw something that made even the toughest man turn pale, because... Hello, my dear listeners. Before I begin my story, I ask you to please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and write in the comments which state or country you are listening from. Your attention warms my heart. Happy listening. 6 months of silence. For me, it wasn't just a number on the calendar, but a thick, viscous air in a house that was once filled with the deep voice of my husband. For 6 months, I woke up alone in our king-size bed, and the first thing I saw was the empty space beside me. Grief doesn't go away with time. No, it just changes shape. From a sharp, cutting stone, it turns into a heavy boulder that you learn to carry in your chest without showing its weight to others. In the morning, I went out into the garden. Ulysses had planted these roses himself. Every morning, he would walk around them like a sentry on duty, shaking off the dew, talking to them. Now, that was my job. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and the last autumn blooms. I carefully snipped a withered bud. Working in the garden was soothing. It gave an illusion of order, an illusion that I could still influence something. Here, among his roses, I felt closer to him. Inside the house, however, the walls pressed in with silence. My only thread connecting me to the world remained my daughter, Zahara. But even that thread had become thin and stretched to the limit lately. After the funeral, she called every day, then less and less often. The conversations became short, businesslike. She no longer asked how I was feeling. She complained about her husband, about work, about the eternal lack of money. I listened, nodded into the receiver, and transferred whatever I could from my pension. I thought she was having a hard time. Youth, stress. I justified her coldness, her inattention. After all, she had lost her father too. And then a month ago, she called late in the evening. Her voice was breaking into hysteria. "Mama, I'm sorry it's so sudden. We need money, urgently, for in surgery." I didn't ask what kind of surgery or why it was so urgent. Inside, everything went cold with maternal fear. My only child, my flesh and blood. I just asked, "How much?" The sum was huge. Almost everything Ulysses and I had put away for our old age, for a rainy day. That rainy day, it seemed, had arrived. In the morning, I withdrew the money from the account and drove it over to her. Zahara met me on the porch, pale, red-eyed. She snatched the envelope, quickly kissed me on the cheek, and mumbled that she had to run to the hospital. The door slammed shut, and I was left standing there on the landing, feeling like an intruder. And so, a month passed, a month of complete, deafening silence. The first week, I didn't call. I didn't want to bother them. I thought she was recovering from the surgery. The second week, I started dialing her number. At first, she didn't pick up. Then, she sent a short text. "Ma, everything's fine. I'll call back." And she didn't. By the third week, her phone was turned off. This morning, standing among my husband's roses, I realized I couldn't sit and wait anymore. It wasn't just fear for her health anymore. Deep in the pit of my stomach, a tight, cold knot began to tie itself. It was a different feeling, similar to what I felt back when I worked as a forensic accountant and saw a perfectly balanced ledger that I knew for a fact was hiding a massive deficit. Everything looked right, but it was fake through and through. I went back into the house. On a hook by the door hung a keychain with a single key, the spare key to her and Jelani's house. I had insisted on having it myself. Just in case, I had said back when they first moved into that house, the one Ulysses and I had put the down payment on, just in case, had arrived. I didn't call Jelani. If something had happened to Zahara, he would have told me himself. And if they had just gone on vacation with my money? No. I pushed that thought away. It was too ugly. The drive to their house took 30 minutes. My hands on the steering wheel were steady. I wasn't nervous. I was driving to do my duty. Inside me, a strange, icy resolve was growing. I had to know the truth, whatever it might be. Their 2-story house in the suburbs looked perfect. The manicured lawn, the clean windows, nothing spoke of trouble. Jelani's car was in the driveway, so he was home. I rang the doorbell. Once, twice, silence. I waited 5 minutes and rang again. No one answered. Then I took out my key. It slid into the lock easily with a quiet click. I pushed the door open. The house greeted me with a cold, curated cleanliness and silence. The air was stale, uninhabited, like a hotel room from which the guests had long since checked out. In the living room, a vase with long-dead flowers stood on the coffee table. There was no dust, not a speck, as if the house was frozen in time. "Zahara?" I called out. My voice sounded hollow, drowning in the silence. "Jelani?" No answer. I walked into the kitchen. Perfect order. Not a single dirty dish. I looked in the fridge. It was almost empty. Just a bottle of water and some kind of sauce. Strange. Very strange. I went back to the hallway intending to go upstairs and froze. I heard a sound. A quiet, barely distinguishable, rhythmic scratching. Scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch. My heart skipped a beat, then started pounding rapidly, echoing in my ears. I held my breath, listening. The sound was coming from above, from the attic. Scratch. Scratch. I walked slowly up the stairs on legs that felt like cotton. On the second-floor landing, there was a small door leading to the attic. I approached it. The scratching got louder. It wasn't the sound of mice or rats. It was a methodical, desperate sound, as if someone was clawing at the wood with a fingernail or something hard. I pulled the door handle, locked. And not just with the internal lock. On the outside of the door itself, a heavy barn bolt had been screwed on, new, shiny, completely alien on that light-colored door. At that moment, the cold knot in my stomach turned into a block of ice. Why lock the attic with a bolt from the outside? What could be in there that required such isolation? The scratching stopped for a moment, then resumed with renewed, desperate force. I stepped back, pulling my phone from my purse. My fingers weren't obeying me, but my brain was working with frightening clarity. I didn't call Zahara or Jelani. I dialed 911. "Emergency services," a male voice answered. My own voice was barely audible. It turned into a strangled whisper. "Hello, I'm at my daughter's house. There's a strange sound coming from the attic. The door is bolted from the outside." I dictated the address, trying to keep my voice from trembling. The firefighters arrived in 10 minutes, which seemed like an eternity to me. 2 sturdy men in uniform. They looked at me, at the bolt, and exchanged glances. "Step back, please," one of them said. He took a crowbar. A deafening crack rang out. Once, twice. The lock wouldn't give. Then his partner hit it with his shoulder. The wood splintered, and the door flew open with a crash, tearing out a piece of the frame. Inside was pitch darkness and a smell. It smelled of sickness, despair, and rot. The firefighter turned on a powerful flashlight. The beam of light cut through the gloom, picking out piles of junk, old furniture, and a figure in the corner. It was a human being, or rather, what was left of one. A skeleton wrapped in gray, parchment-like skin, dressed in dirty rags. He was sitting on the floor, chained by the ankle to a heating pipe. Time stopped for me. Air ceased to enter my lungs. The world narrowed down to that beam of light and the figure within it. And at that moment, the man in the corner slowly, with superhuman effort, turned his head toward the light. A gaunt face covered in gray stubble, sunken eyes in which a weak, almost extinguished spark of consciousness burned. And I recognized him. The firefighter next to me turned pale and cursed through his teeth. And I just stared. I stared at my husband, Ulysses, whom I had buried 6 months ago. The world around me vanished for a moment, collapsed into a ringing void, and then returned with the shouts of the rescuers, with the smell of dust and despair. I took a step forward into the doorway. "Careful!" My voice sounded alien, raspy but surprisingly firm. "Carry him carefully. His head. Support his head." They carried him out on a soft stretcher. that fragile, weightless body that had once been my strong, broad-shouldered husband. I followed, not touching him, afraid he would crumble at my touch. In the ambulance, I sat beside him, never taking my eyes off him. The paramedic was saying something to me, asking questions, but I didn't hear the words. I only saw his chest rising under the thin blanket. Once, and again, twice. He was breathing. That was the only thing that mattered. At the hospital, they separated us. He was taken to the ICU, and I was left in the corridor under the cold light of fluorescent lamps, the smell of antiseptic and trouble. I sat on a hard plastic chair, staring at the white wall, feeling nothing. No fear, no relief, no horror. Everything inside me had burned out, like lightning had struck an old tree, leaving behind only a charred, hollow shell. An hour later, a doctor came out, an older man with tired eyes. He spoke to me quietly, choosing his words. "Extreme degree of cachexia," he pronounced the terrible foreign word. "Systematic starvation, muscle atrophy, dehydration to such a degree that—" He shook his head. "Your husband is very lucky. A few more days and we wouldn't have been able to do anything." I nodded silently. This wasn't just neglect, the doctor continued, looking intently into my eyes. This was the intentional, methodical deprivation of food and water over many months. The police are already here. They'll want to speak with you. I nodded again. I understood everything. Every word of his wasn't news, but confirmation. Confirmation of what had frozen like an ice pick in my brain the moment I saw the barn bolt on the attic door. This wasn't an accident. This was slow, calculated murder. When they finally let me into his room, he was sleeping. His large frame, even withered, took up the whole bed. Skin transparent as cigarette paper stretched over his bones. Through an IV, life, a nutrient solution, was slowly dripping into a vein on his arm. The quiet beep of the monitor counted the beats of his weak heart. I sat on the chair by the bed and watched. For 6 months I had mourned him. I remembered the weight of the coffin lid, remembered the smell of incense and lilies in the church. I remembered throwing a handful of cold, damp earth onto the polished wood. Whose ashes had I buried? Whose body had I mourned? It was a farce, a cruel, monstrous play in which I had been given the role of the grief-stricken widow. And the director? The director was my own daughter. That woman, Zenobia Banks, who cried at the cemetery, who went to the grave every day and talked to a marble slab. She died. She died there, in that dark attic, the very instant the flashlight beam picked her husband's face out of the gloom. Her grief, so deep and real, had turned into a warm, heavy shawl over these 6 months, one I wrapped myself in against the loneliness. Now that shawl had burned to ashes, and beneath the ash was something else, hard, cold, and sharp as a shard of ice. Love for my daughter? That died too. I tried to grope for it inside, to find even a spark, even a smoldering ember. Nothing. Emptiness. Instead of love, a calm, icy understanding. Understanding that the creature I bore, carried and raised, had turned out to be a monster, and this monster had tried to kill my husband and destroy my life. I looked at Ulysses, at his sunken cheeks, at the gray in his matted beard. I remembered his laugh, his strong hands, the way he called me my Z. I remembered our life, how he dropped out of college to go to work and support me and little Zahara, how he drove a cab at night after his main job to buy his daughter a piano, which she ended up barely playing, how he sold his beloved vintage Cadillac to pay for her education at a prestigious HBCU. He gave her everything. She locked him in an attic to slowly die of hunger, and took my last dime so that what? So she could pay for a vacation while her father gnawed on drywall from hunger? Tears didn't come. There was nothing inside that could become tears. Only cold. Cold and clarity. The clarity of a surgeon before a complex operation. There was no more room for emotions, only the job that needed to be done. I took my phone out of my bag. My gaze was riveted to my husband's face. I didn't look for Zahara's number. I didn't call the police. My finger found another contact in the address book. Octavius Freeman. Octavius was the son of my late best friend, Althea. Once, many years ago, I helped Althea get through a messy divorce, helped her with the calculations during the division of assets. I'm a forensic accountant by trade, after all, even though I hadn't worked for almost 40 years since Zahara was born. Althea always said I saved her back then. Her son Octavius had become a brilliant lawyer, smart, honest, with the grip of a bulldog. He was the only one I could trust right now. I pressed call. "Mrs. Banks, hello?" Surprise sounded in his voice. We didn't talk often. "Hello, Octavius." My voice was steady, no trembling. "I need your help, urgently." "What happened? Is everything all right?" "Not exactly. Listen to me carefully. We have little time. My husband Ulysses is alive." Deafening silence hung on the other end of the line. "How alive?" he finally squeezed out. "But the funeral." "It's a long story. I'll tell it later. Right now I need you to do a few things without asking questions. Just do them. Can you?" "Yes, of course. Mrs. Banks, go ahead." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts into a clear, inexorable sequence. First, immediately, right now, freeze all joint accounts belonging to Ulysses and me. Every single cent. Cards, savings, everything. I'll dictate the passcodes to you now. Understood? Octavius's voice became businesslike and focused. Second, start the procedure to grant me full power of attorney over all my husband's affairs. He is currently in the hospital, incapacitated. I will need access to all his documents, pension accounts, everything. It will take time, but I'll handle everything. A medical report will speed up the process. It will be done, I said firmly. And third, most importantly, no one must know that you are doing this, especially my daughter Zahara and her husband. To them, I am a grief-stricken, confused old woman. Let it stay that way. I understand you, Mrs. Banks. There was steel in Octavius's voice. Consider it already in motion. I'll be in touch. Hold on. I'm holding on, Octavius. Thank you. I ended the call. The room was still quiet, only the beep of the equipment and my husband's weak breathing. I put the phone in my bag. That was my first move. The war was just beginning, and I had no intention of losing it. I placed my palm on his hand, not on the skin, but on the blanket beside it, still afraid of causing him pain. I sat like that until morning, and then another day, and another. My life took on a new, harsh rhythm. Morning in my empty apartment, a short, tasteless breakfast, then the bus to the hospital, endless hours on the chair by his bed, conversations with doctors who shook their heads and spoke of insignificant positive dynamics. The evening bus home, a lonely dinner in front of a TV I didn't watch, dreamless sleep. During those days, the police tried to talk to me several times. I answered in monosyllables, pleading shock. I don't understand anything. I don't know anything. The role of the confused, heartbroken old woman came easily to me. I had played it for so long that it had almost become my second skin. But beneath that skin, armor was already hardening. I waited. I knew they would call. Money, their god, their heir, their only measure of everything. Sooner or later, they would discover the source had run dry. The call came on the fourth day. I was wiping Ulysses's face with a wet cloth when my phone vibrated in my bag. I took it out. The name lighting up the screen used to bring a wave of warmth to me. Baby girl. Now, it evoked nothing. Just information. I let the phone vibrate for a few more seconds, took a deep breath, exhaled, and brought it to my ear. My voice, when I answered, was exactly what it needed to be, weak, cracked, as if I had just woken from a nap. Hello? Zahara? Hey, Mama, hi! Zahara's voice was unnaturally cheerful, loud. In the background, I could hear the splashing of water and some light foreign music. How are you doing there? Everything okay? She wasn't asking. She was stating. a formality that had to be observed before getting to the main point. I imagined her. A lounge chair by a pool with water of an implausibly blue color, huge sunglasses hiding the emptiness in her eyes, a glass in her hand with something cold and expensive. Next to her, her husband Jelani, with the look of a satiated, self-satisfied predator on his face. They were vacationing on money from the life insurance of a man they were starving to death a few yards from their bedroom. "Zahara, baby," I whispered, putting all the senile infirmity I was capable of into my voice. Just getting by. Where are you? It's so noisy." "Oh, Mama. Jelani and I decided to go away for a couple of days just to clear our heads, get some fresh air. We're so tired. You understand?" "Fresh air?" I looked at the tube inserted into my husband's nose. He was breathing with difficulty, too. "Of course, baby, you need to rest." "Mama, listen, there's some kind of problem." Jelani's voice unceremoniously cut into the conversation, irritated, impatient. "I just tried to pay with the card at the restaurant, and they told me, declined. Same thing with Zahara's. Something's up with the bank. Can you look into it?" Here it starts. I closed my eyes, gathering strength for the performance. "With the bank?" I feigned confusion. "Oh, honey, I don't understand any of that. Maybe they have some kind of glitch?" "What kind of glitch?" Jelani scoffed. I heard Zahara whispering something to him, probably asking him to be gentler. "Mama, it's us again," she said, her voice taking on those capricious, demanding notes I had known since her childhood. "Come on, please. It's your main account, daddies. Maybe there's some kind of audit. Call them, say everything is fine. Otherwise, we're sitting here like idiots without money." They weren't just sitting without money. They were sitting in the Maldives. Octavius had sent me a message in the morning. Target acquired. Credit card transactions. 4 Seasons Resort Maldives. Resting, breathing fresh air. "Oh, sweetie, maybe it's that, what do you call it, fraud alert?" I carefully chose my words, as if struggling to remember them. "They told me at the credit union that if there are suddenly unusual expenses from abroad, they might block it for security." "Well, there you go," Zahara exclaimed happily. "So just call them. Confirm it's us. Tell them everything is good." I paused, faking a heavy sigh. "I'll try, of course, baby, but I'm not home right now, and my eyes aren't seeing so well. Looking for those documents. I'll look when I can. Maybe tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" Jelani exploded. "We have nothing to eat dinner with tonight. Mrs. Banks, can you just pick up the phone and call? It takes 5 minutes." I heard the poorly concealed rage in his voice. The rage of a spoiled master at a slow servant. They didn't see a mother in me. They saw a function, a tool for accessing money. And this tool had malfunctioned, causing their extreme displeasure. I'll try, Jelani," I stammered, adding a note of hurt and fear to my voice. "Don't yell at me, please. My blood pressure will spike. I can barely walk as it is after everything." That was a precise strike. Mentioning everything, the funeral, their shared grief, made them shut up for a moment. "Okay, Mama, I'm sorry." Zahara's voice became sickeningly sweet again. "He didn't mean to upset you. We're just nervous. You'll try, right? We'll call you back in a couple of hours." "Okay, baby. Okay," I whispered and pressed end call. The silence in the room became dense again. I looked at the phone in my hand. They hadn't even asked how I was living alone these 6 months, how I was coping. They were only interested in the account. They heard a weak, confused, incompetent old woman on the line, someone easily pressured, forced, shamed. And they were wrong. That was their biggest, fatal mistake. They underestimated me. They had underestimated me all my life. For them, I was just Mama, a quiet shadow who cooked gumbo, ironed shirts, and was always ready to lend money. They never knew that this quiet shadow was once one of the best auditors in her department, capable of finding the devil in a perfectly balanced report. They decided I was broken, but I had only just begun to reassemble myself. From shards of grief, from ashes of love, from the icy fire of rage. I knew what they would do next. In a couple of hours, they would call again. I wouldn't pick up. Then again, I wouldn't answer again. Their irritation would grow into anxiety, and then into anger. An inconvenience, a small problem with a card, would turn into a threat to their beautiful vacation paid for by someone else's life. And they would come. They would drop their Maldives and rush here to deal with the old mother who dared to cause them problems. They would rush straight into the trap I was preparing for them. I got up and walked to the window. Below, people bustled, cars drove by. The world lived its ordinary life, unaware of the tragedy locked within the walls of this hospital room. I took out my phone again and dialed Octavius's number. "Octavius, it's me. They took the bait. They're coming home." "Excellent," Octavius answered. "Time is working for us. Mrs. Banks, I've prepared a place for you, not in my main office, so as not to attract attention. It's a small room in another building. It has everything you need. Come when you're ready." The next day, for the first time in a week, I left Ulysses for more than an hour. The nurse promised to look after him. I got in a cab and gave the driver Octavius's address. It was an old building downtown, one of those housing dozens of small firms. Octavius met me downstairs. He looked serious and focused. I saw no pity in his eyes, only respect and readiness to work. That was exactly what I needed. He led me into a small, ascetic office, a desk, 2 chairs, a computer, and a large printer. On the desk lay the first stack of documents. "These are the statements for the main accounts for the last year," he said. "We got the authorization from the doctors, so access to Mr. Banks's pension and insurance documents will be available within the day. What else do you need?" "Property deeds for my husband's and my condo, for their house, everything related to real estate, and Ulysses' life insurance policy." I remember he had a large life insurance policy from the company. "Already requested," Octavius nodded. "I'll leave you to it. Call if you need anything." The door closed behind him. I was left alone in the silence, broken only by the hum of the computer. For a moment, I felt strange, almost out of place. For the last 40 years, my main job had been pots and pans, PTA meetings, and comfort in the home. And now, before me lay columns of numbers, bank transfers, debits, and credits. I sat at the table, picked up the first page of the statement, and something clicked inside me. The dusty gears in my head, dormant for decades, slowly, with a creak, set into motion. The woman who knew that behind every number stands a story woke up. Forensic accountant Zenobia Banks was back on the job. At first, everything looked mundane: habitual expenses, transfers, pension deposits. But the deeper I immersed myself in the papers, the more clearly I saw what I hadn't noticed before, blinded by grief and trust. Monthly large cash withdrawals that Zahara explained as renovations. Transfers to Jelani's account labeled as debt repayment. I remembered her complaints, her eternal requests for help, and now, looking at the dry figures, I saw them in their true light. This wasn't help. It was methodical siphoning of money. A few hours later, a courier brought a new package of documents. In it was Ulysses' insurance policy and a copy of his death certificate. I looked at the form with the official seal. Banks, Ulysses Cornelius. Cause of death: massive myocardial infarction. Doctor's signature. Morgue seal. Everything was in place, and everything was a lie. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just deception. This was a well-thought-out, cold-blooded plan. They didn't just hide him, they officially killed him. The next document confirmed my worst guess: a notification from the insurance company about the payout. The sum was written clearly and plainly: millions of dollars. Beneficiary: Zahara Banks. Daughter. Date of payout: 5 months ago. That's what the Maldives were bought with. That's where the money for Jelani's new car and Zahara's expensive jewelry, which I saw in her recent social media photos, came from. They were feasting on money from the death of a living man. I worked all day, forgetting about time, about food. Octavius checked in, silently bringing me tea and sandwiches. He saw the expression on my face and asked nothing. He understood that I was digging up not just financial fraud. I was digging up the grave into which they had tried to bury me and my husband alive. By evening, the picture was complete, and it was monstrous. After receiving the insurance payout, they began emptying Ulysses's retirement account time after time, in small amounts so as not to arouse suspicion. They forged his signature on the power of attorney. I would recognize that forgery out of 1,000. Ulysses had a distinctive signature with a small flourish at the end. Here was a crude, clumsy copy. But the last document, which I found almost at the very bottom of the folder, made even my heart, hardened by this day, freeze. It was an application for a reverse mortgage on Ulysses's and my condo, my apartment, the one I was living in right now. The application was submitted in my name. Attached to it was a copy of a power of attorney, allegedly signed by me. It stated that I, Zenobia Banks, fully entrusted my son-in-law, Jelani Davis, to dispose of all my property due to the deterioration of my cognitive health following the death of my spouse. I looked at my signature. Just as crude a forgery as Ulysses's. The application was under review. The bank hadn't given a final answer yet. And then I understood everything. I put all the pieces of this diabolical puzzle together. The plan wasn't just to kill the father and take his money. The plan was total. First, stage Ulysses' death, get the insurance, clean out his accounts. Then, using my grief and senile incompetence, lure the last savings out of me, which they did under the pretext of surgery. The next step? Deprive me of the apartment, the only thing I had left. And then, when I was left penniless and homeless, I could easily be put in a nursing home, proving my total incapacity. And no one would ever listen to a crazy old woman insisting her husband was alive. They weren't just killing him, they were erasing him from life. And then they intended to erase me too. I leaned back in my chair. There wasn't enough air in the room. That quiet, scratching sound I heard in the attic, it wasn't just Ulysses scratching at the door in a desperate attempt to survive. No, it was the sound of them scratching out, scraping away my own future, my life, my memory, my dignity. They wanted to leave behind nothing but scorched earth and money in their accounts. I sat in the silence of the small, dusty office. Outside the window it had gotten dark. The city lit its lights, and inside me another fire lit up, cold white, like the flame of an acetylene torch. A fire that burns everything to the ground, leaving neither ash nor smoke. At that moment, I ceased to be a victim. I became the verdict. I stood up from the desk. My movements were slow and precise, like someone walking on thin ice. I gathered all the papers into a neat stack, every document, every number, every forged signature. It was a nail in the lid of their coffin. I didn't feel hatred. Hatred is too hot, too human a feeling. I felt only cold, implacable righteousness. I called Octavius. "It's ready," I said. "I have everything needed. Now it's your turn. Start the mechanism." "Are you sure?" he asked. "There will be no turning back. I have never been so sure in my life. Octavius, do it." They flew in 2 days later, tired, angry, smelling of foreign tropical sun and expensive perfume. The flight from paradise to cold autumn reality had been long and unpleasant. Their phones were silent. I wasn't picking up anymore. Their banking apps showed zeros on all accounts. Their self-satisfaction had been replaced by irritation, and the irritation by poorly concealed anxiety. But they were still sure that this was just an annoying misunderstanding, a stupid bank error, or the senile dementia of a mother who misunderstood something, pressed the wrong button, and was now hiding out of fear. They were riding from the airport in a cab, and Jelani scolded Zahara the whole way. "I told you, you can't trust her with things like this. She's gotten old, confuses everything. We'll get there. Give her a talking to so she doesn't meddle where she's not asked anymore. We'll take all the cards, all the access codes from her. Tell her it's safer that way." Zahara was silent, pursing her lips. She didn't like it when Jelani talked about her mother like that, but she didn't dare object. Besides, deep down, she agreed with him. Her mother had become inconvenient, always sad, always with some petty problems. Of course, she ruined everything. Who else? The taxi stopped at their perfect house. They got out. Jelani dragged the suitcases out of the trunk with a crash. The mood was completely ruined. They would quickly drop off their things and drive to Mama's. They needed to solve this problem once and for all, but something was wrong. The usually impeccably clean front door looked different. Taped right at eye level with Scotch tape was a white envelope. "What the hell?" Jelani muttered, walking closer. He expected to see a flyer or a utility bill, but the envelope was official, thick, with a government seal. He tore it off. Zahara walked up and stood next to him, looking over his shoulder. He tore open the envelope and pulled out a sheet, folded in two. It was a subpoena. Official, strict, regarding the initiation of a criminal case for fraud on an especially large scale. Zahara Banks and Jelani Davis were ordered to appear. The words danced before Jelani's eyes. Criminal case, fraud, special investigator. He reread the text several times, but the meaning didn't change. It wasn't a mistake. "What is this?" Zahara whispered. Her face went as white as the paper in her husband's hands. "Jelani, what is this?" But he didn't answer. His gaze darted lower to the mailbox. Sticking out of the slot was the corner of another envelope made of expensive heavy paper with their bank's logo. He yanked it out. His hands were trembling slightly. Inside was an official notification. Dry, ruthless, bureaucratic language informed them that due to a request from investigative authorities, all assets connected to the name Banks Ulysses Cornelius, including insurance payouts and pension savings, were frozen until the conclusion of the investigation into the case of fraud and document forgery. The blood drained from Jelani's face. He stood on the porch of his house, where every detail had been bought with this now frozen money, and felt the ground slipping out from under his feet. It wasn't a glitch, not a mistake, not senile dementia. "She knows," he wheezed. His voice was barely audible. "Who?" "Mama." Zahara looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. "What does she know? How? That can't be." She started to panic. Her breathing became rapid, jagged. "It's some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding. We have to call the bank right now." She snatched her phone from her purse. Her fingers ran frantically over the screen. Jelani just looked at her, and in his eyes, usually so brazen and self-confident, splashed cold, animal terror. He, the architect of this whole plan, understood first. He understood that the game was over. "Hello, miss? I want to know what is happening with my accounts." Zahara was almost screaming into the receiver. "Why is everything blocked?" On the other end of the line, the calm, dispassionate voice of a bank clerk answered her. He spoke of investigative actions, of penal code articles, of a court order. It was a wall, an impenetrable wall of legal terms behind which catastrophe lurked. Zahara lowered the phone, her face twisted. All her feigned cheerfulness, all her resort gloss fell away like cheap gold leaf. Before Jelani stood a frightened, confused woman who realized her cozy, beautiful world was collapsing. He said, she stammered, he said the basis for the investigation was a statement in the name of my father. Jelani flinched as if hit. In the name of her father. But her father was dead. His ashes were in the ground, and the death certificate was in the safe. That meant... Their eyes met, and in that moment, they both understood. They understood everything. That her mother hadn't just learned about the money, she had learned about the attic. Their arrogance, their irritation, their haughtiness, it all evaporated without a trace. In its place came sticky, primal fear, the fear of beasts cornered. They were no longer masters of the situation, they were prey, and the hunter had already sprung the trap. "To the car!" Jelani barked, grabbing Zahara by the arm. His face turned into a hard, ugly mask. Panic was replaced by fury. The only chance, the only exit his inflamed brain saw was to get to the source of the problem, to the mother. They didn't call a taxi. Jelani got behind the wheel of his car, the very one sitting in the driveway as a symbol of their success. He drove like a madman, taking off sharply, cutting off other cars, flying through yellow lights. Zahara sat next to him, clutching the dashboard and muttering something incoherent. "We'll explain everything to her. Tell her it was a mistake, that we wanted what was best. She's Mama, she'll understand, she'll forgive." But this wasn't hope. It was an incantation, an attempt to talk away the reality rushing at them like an oncoming train. During the short, insane drive, a plan matured in their heads, a plan of desperation. Play on pity, cry, blame, scream about their grief, about how hard it was for them after Dad's death, how they couldn't cope. Scare the old woman, confuse her, force her to withdraw the statement. They were used to her always giving in, always forgiving, always taking their side. They clung to this habit like drowning people to a straw. They burst into my apartment building, stomping up the stairs. Jelani kicked my apartment door open. It wasn't locked. I was waiting for them. They froze on the threshold, breathing heavily, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly. Right in front of me stood a teapot, a thin curl of steam rising from its spout, a cup of tea, a saucer with lemon, a picture of domestic comfort and peace. An idol they had come to destroy. But the idol was deceptive. Next to me at the same table sat 3 others. On one side, Octavius in a sharp suit with a folder in his hands. His face was impenetrable. On the other side, 2 men in plain clothes. Their poses were relaxed, but their gazes were sharp, attentive, the gazes of people who know how to wait and see the essence. For a moment, silence hung in the hallway. Zahara and Jelani looked at this scene, and their pre-rehearsed aggression cracked. This wasn't what they expected. They expected to see a frightened, crying old woman who could be broken in 5 minutes. Instead, they saw a tribunal. But it was too late to retreat. Zahara, like an actress, walking onto the stage, after a disastrous first act, took a step forward and began her performance. "Mama!" Her voice rang with fake, hysterical pain. "What have you done? What does all this mean?" She rushed toward the table, but stopped a couple of steps away, as if hitting an invisible wall. Tears gushed from her eyes, real hot tears of fear and rage. "Do you even understand what you've done? We just started to recover after Daddy's death. It hurts us so much, and you accuse us of something? You set the police on us? For what? For taking money that Daddy would have left us anyway?" She spoke, and her voice got louder and louder, breaking into a scream. It was a stream of accusations, complaints, reproaches. She spoke of her sleepless nights, her depression, how she missed her father. She said that I, her own mother, had betrayed her, stabbed her in the back at the hardest moment. I remained silent. I just looked at her. I let her speak her piece, let her empty her entire arsenal of lies and manipulation. The men at the table were silent too. Octavius didn't flinch. They all watched this one-woman theater, and there wasn't a drop of sympathy in their eyes. Zahara spoke for a long time. She let it all out. When the words ran out, she fell silent, breathing heavily, waiting for a reaction, expecting that I would now burst into tears too, start apologizing, justifying myself, that everything would be as always. The pause dragged on. The silence in the kitchen became dense, heavy. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. The clock Ulysses gave me for our silver anniversary. Tick-tock, tick-tock, counting down the last seconds of their freedom. Finally, when her ragged breathing leveled out, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but in that silence it sounded like the strike of a bell. There was no pain in it, no anger, no resentment. There was nothing. Emptiness. I looked straight into my daughter's tear-stained eyes. My gaze was hard and flat, like the granite slab on that fake grave. "I was at your house, Zahara." One simple sentence, but it made her flinch as if she had been slapped. Her face froze. I paused slightly, letting the words sink into her consciousness, and then added the second phrase, and this phrase destroyed her world completely. "Your father is asking to see you." Zahara's face turned to stone. Her eyes, just full of tears, widened in horror. She slowly turned her head toward Jelani, looking for salvation in him, support, an explanation, but his face was even scarier. The mask of self-satisfied irritation had slipped off, revealing a cold, calculating player who realized he had lost one game and immediately started another, even dirtier one. "So, you found him," Jelani said. It wasn't a question. He stepped forward, pushing Zahara behind his back. He was taking the game upon himself. "Well, that simplifies a lot of things, but you see the picture completely wrong." He spoke calmly, almost confidentially, addressing not me, but the two detectives. His voice exuded reasonableness and concern. This was his last, most monstrous card. "About a year ago, Mr. Banks had a massive stroke. We didn't want to tell you, Mrs. Banks." He threw a glance at me full of fake sympathy. "We didn't want to upset you. You were already fragile. After the stroke, he changed. He started having fits of uncontrollable aggression. He became dangerous to himself and others." I listened to this stream of lies, and nothing stirred within me. I was just a spectator. He lunged at Zahara, tried to hit me several times. We called doctors, but they just threw up their hands. Dementia, they said, an aggressive form. We didn't know what to do. Put our own father in a psych ward? We couldn't. Noble notes rang in his voice. We decided to care for him ourselves, but his condition worsened. He started running away from home. "We were afraid he would harm you, Mama. He constantly talked about you, threatened." He paused, letting his lie sink in. Zahara, standing behind him, began to play along. She sobbed, covering her face. The picture was turning out almost perfect. Two exhausted, loving children forced to take extreme measures to protect a maddened father and a weak mother. "The attic," Jelani pronounced the word with a heavy sigh. "It was a last resort. We set up a room there, brought him food, water, but he refused to eat, threw plates at us. We were forced to lock the door so he wouldn't break out and cause trouble. We did it for your own safety, Mrs. Banks. We wanted to protect you from his anger." Now he turned to me. His gaze was oily with feigned compassion. "And now I see that the illness, alas, has touched you too. Your memory, it's failing you. You don't remember his attacks, his threats. And this gentleman," he nodded toward Octavius, "is obviously taking advantage of your condition, manipulating an elderly, sick woman to get hold of her money. It's obvious." The lie was complete, flawless in its vileness. They were trying to kill two birds with one stone, justify their actions, and declare me insane, and Octavius a fraud. It was their final gambit, desperate, dirty, and as they thought, foolproof. After all, who would believe an old woman with signs of dementia when her own caring children testified against her? Silence reigned in the kitchen again. Jelani stood with the look of a man who had just presented irrefutable evidence. Zahara cried quietly at his shoulder. But it was too late. Their words, however convincing they seemed, shattered against the rock I had been building so carefully all these days. The older detective, a gray-haired man with tired but very attentive eyes who hadn't uttered a word until then, slowly coughed. He didn't look at Jelani. He looked at me, then at Octavius, and nodded slightly. Then, just as slowly, he reached for the folder lying before him on the table, opened it, and neatly, without a single wasted movement, slid it across the table toward Jelani. "Familiarize yourself, please," he said in an even, colorless voice. The folder stopped right in front of them. The top sheet was the first one. It was the medical report from the hospital. Several pages covered in cramped medical handwriting. There wasn't a word about a stroke, not a word about dementia. But there were other words: cachexia, muscle dystrophy due to prolonged starvation, critical dehydration. And the final key phrase: patient is fully conscious, oriented in time and space, speech is coherent, cognitive functions are unimpaired. Jelani's face began to change. Confidence was sliding off him like a melting mask. The detective, not changing his tone, continued, "Your father has already given a preliminary statement, Mr. Davis. He remembers everything." He turned the page. The next document was my work. Neatly compiled spreadsheets, movement of funds and accounts, copies of bank withdrawal slips, all the operations they performed while their father was dying of hunger. Next to every large transaction, a note was made in red pen. Tour to Maldives. Car purchase, Audi Q7. Cartier jewelry store. My accountant's handwriting, clear and ruthless, turned their luxurious life into an indictment. The corner of Jelani's mouth twitched. Zahara stopped crying and stared at the papers with stupefied horror. The detective turned another page. It was a copy of the death certificate, the very one with the forged signature and seal, and next to it, an official reply from the morgue stating that citizen Ulysses Cornelius Banks had never been admitted there, and the doctor whose signature was on the document had been fired 2 years before the specified date. And the last sheet, a copy of my application to the bank withdrawing the reverse mortgage request, and the conclusion of a handwriting analysis confirming that the signatures on the powers of attorney, both mine and Ulysses, were crude forgeries. The detective closed the folder. Dead silence stood in the kitchen. Their last lie hadn't just failed. It had become the most weighty proof of their guilt. It confirmed not just their greed but their cold, calculating mind, their ability to lie while looking you in the eye, their absolute, boundless cruelty. Their final gambit had sealed their fate. Davis, Jelani Marcus, Banks, Zahara Denise, the detective said in the same calm voice, rising from the table. His partner stood up too. "You are under arrest on suspicion of committing crimes provided for by statutes." He began listing the numbers of the statutes: attempted murder, fraud on an especially large scale, forgery of documents, reckless endangerment. And I just sat and watched them, watched as cold steel bracelets clicked shut on the wrists of my only daughter, my flesh and blood. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with empty, uncomprehending eyes as she was led away. There was no remorse in her gaze, only bewilderment. Like a little girl caught stealing a piece of candy who couldn't understand why the punishment turned out to be so disproportionately cruel. She never understood that she hadn't stolen candy. She had stolen a life. When the door closed behind them, I remained sitting at the table. Octavius silently poured me some fresh tea. I took a sip. It was bitter and scalding. The war was over. I had won, but there were ruins in my soul. 9 months passed, exactly enough time to carry and give birth to a new life, or to bury an old one and start another. The trial was short. The evidence base Octavius and I collected was irrefutable. Zahara and Jelani received long sentences. Their names were no longer spoken in my apartment. I put their photographs in the bottom drawer of the dresser. Not with anger, no. Just as one puts away the belongings of a deceased person so they don't reopen the wound. My daughter died to me the day I saw the bolt on the attic door. Everything that happened after was just the processing of the death certificate. Ulysses was slowly recovering. The doctors had performed a miracle. He was still weak, moving in a wheelchair, but his mind was clear and sharp as before. Physically, he had aged 20 years, but the familiar, slightly mocking glint appeared in his eyes again. He was transferred to a good rehabilitation center outside the city, a quiet, peaceful place with a pine forest and caring staff. I visited him every day. We walked in the park. I pushed his wheelchair along paths strewn with pine needles. We didn't talk about what happened, not once, as if we had silently agreed to leave that horror behind in that past life. Instead, we talked about books he was reading, about politics, reminisced about our youth, our first dates, funny incidents from life. We were getting to know each other anew, like two old people who miraculously survived a shipwreck and ended up on the same desert island. And on this island, it was just the two of us. Our big family house, the one Ulysses and I built together, the one where Zahara grew up and where every corner held memories. I sold it. I couldn't live there anymore. Too many ghosts, too much pain. Instead, I bought a small, bright condo in a new building on a high floor with huge windows and a balcony overlooking the whole city. Today, for the first time, I didn't go to see Ulysses. He had procedures, and I decided to dedicate the day to myself. The morning was sunny, rare for this autumn. I brewed myself coffee, not instant like before, but freshly ground in a French press, and stepped out onto the balcony. The city below hummed, living its turbulent, eternal life. Cars flowed along the avenues like blood through arteries. People hurried about their business, and I stood above this bustle, in my quiet haven, and felt calm. For the first time in many, many years, I felt not anxiety, not grief, not duty, but specifically calmness, deep, clear, like water in a forest lake. I was no longer just a mother, not a widow, not a victim. All these roles, like old worn-out clothes, were cast off. Only I remained. On the small table on the balcony lay a tablet. I picked it up, sat in a comfortable chair. Open on the screen was not a TV show and not a news feed. It was a textbook. Modern Methods of Financial Audit, Software and Data Analysis. A few weeks ago, I signed up for online continuing education courses. I decided to reinstate my CPA license. The world had moved far ahead since I last balanced debits and credits, but the basics remain the same. And logic, the ability to see the essence behind the numbers. It's like riding a bicycle. Once you learn, you never forget. I read about new programs, about big data analysis methods, and the dusty gears in my head, which I had started with such difficulty 9 months ago, now turned easily and without squeaking. I felt my brain, occupied for a long time only with recipes and household problems, greedily absorbing new information. I felt myself returning to me, to that young, ambitious Zenobia who could sit up all night over reports, getting almost physical pleasure from how order and truth are born from the chaos of numbers. I didn't know if I would work in my new specialty. Maybe I'll do some small consulting. Or maybe I just need this for myself. To prove to myself that life doesn't end at 68, that it doesn't end at all, until you decide to put a period on it yourself. I took a sip of coffee. It was delicious. The sun warmed my face. The city made noise below. And at that moment, looking at a complex formula on the tablet screen, I smiled for the first time in a long, long time. Not with a forced, polite smile, but a real one. Quiet, light, coming from the very depths of my soul. I wasn't just a survivor. I was Zenobia Banks, and I was just getting started. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.